But more music, no. But we're going to start. I'm starting to take just a few minutes of your time to get a prelude here on our plan for tonight. My horoscope today was this: if you think that others demand a lot, you are 100% right. If you would like to go in a different direction, do. Tonight, be ready to go till the wee hours. Well, music, that's a possibility. So that is my plan for tonight. The Center at American West has a tradition of hosting events on heated issues and asking everyone present to listen with respect. It is also important to say that no one at a center event is asked to listen with agreement or with submissiveness or with a consent to convert, which they may not feel. We love our tradition of respectful exchange, and I begin by asking you to respect it and to join us in that. An important element of my situation tonight is that I am part of this big National Science Foundation Sustainability Research Network grant to investigate the impacts of shale gas and oil production on water, air, land, and human communities. As part of the operations of this 5-year, $12 million grant, we are evaluated for our neutrality. So, again, I should say this very explicitly. I and the center staff and other team members will be evaluated for our neutrality, but no one in the audience has to submit to that appraisal. You are all under full First Amendment rights of free thought and free expression. I embrace the idea that you will reach your own judgments. But I ask you to exercise your rights of free expression and your rights to reach your own conclusions in a way that is compatible with everyone in the room tonight being able to hear the governor. The unhappy times of the summer of 2009, sometimes in my memory, those memories of members of Congress around the nation trying to hold town hall meetings where constituents shouted down and silenced by Tea Party members. The Center at American West does not take partisan positions, but I will veer from our practice to express a personal opinion of my own. I am glad that Boulder County in 2009 was spared the sorrows of having Tea Party members shout down their elected officials and prevent them from speaking. And yet it would be dishonest for me simply to condemn the Tea Party for a method that does not, in my judgment, enhance democracy. It would be more honest to say to all of you that I started college in 1968 at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and on a few occasions I enthusiastically took part in shouting and in keeping others from hearing what public officials said. At the University of California, I've changed dramatically, but it's been a great progression. I will tell this one very brief story from that era. I was a freshman, I was 17, I attended the famous meeting where the regents of the University of Colorado voted, that would be intrusive, wouldn't it? That would be so hard. We're speaking about state authority in the course of the meeting, and now we're going to about that. So, excuse me, the regents of the University of California, the famous meeting where they voted to fire Angela Davis. I was there. You might think I would have an interesting story to tell about that. I was not. I have no story. Governor Reagan was there. I did get to hit Governor Reagan's car with my hand as it was driving away. I did have that, which didn't work out well because my mother and father were watching the TV news that night. I'm not sure what effect I did have to point out. I have no story to tell of the meeting because all I heard was the people around me shouting at the regents, and one of the shouting voices that kept me from hearing anything of substance was my own voice. So, the plan after this evening is this. I turn in my grades on May 12th. We schedule a lunch outing to the sink with anyone here who is pursuing better and more effective forms of public protest. At the lunch, I get to reminisce, and I will pay for this person. At the lunch, I get to reminisce about olden days and the era of protest against segregation in the Vietnam War, and the people younger than I get to help me understand the reasons for their current approach to protest. And we all get to wallow in sorrow for a few minutes over the fact that the Tea Party groups were so nimble and adaptable in borrowing these well-established forms of left-wing protest for right-wing protest. So, if you're interested in taking part in this lunch, see me after the program, or use the address that is in the middle of the program on the inside page, so you'll find my evidence. Our procedure at these FrackingSENSE series sessions, a number of you have been there and know this. We have written questions in your program. is a small piece of paper. You can write your question on that. About half an hour into the program, elegant young preachers from the center will be circulating in a silk-like manner around the room, picking up the questions. They will start them and prepare them for the governor and me. So that is our procedure. It allows us to get through a slew of questions in an efficient way that I'm proud of. You've really been able to attend to most interests. Now, a quick getting to know you moment for me. How many came to hear the governor? Yeah. So why are you talking, Patty? It's really good. How many came to hear the governor in order to decide if you agree or disagree with him? Percentage. How many came? How many came to hear the governor in order to confirm that he holds positions that you disagree with? Okay, we're here till the wee hours. How many came to ask the governor a question? Okay, that might be in our range, but it's my fear that even with our efficient method of soliciting questions and getting them presented, we may not get through all those questions, and we may not hear some of the challenges that some of you came to confirm your disagreement. So my proposal, and I have talked to your staff people about this, Governor, it is okay. The governor has agreed to let me schedule a meeting with him and his senior staff sometime in the next couple of weeks in which I can present a synthesis of the questions and challenges raised by members of this audience that we were not able to get to tonight. If a significant share of those questions directly challenge the positions the governor has taken, I'll present them to the governor without in any way softening their edge. I would then prepare a written summary for the public of the results of that conversation. So let's say you take me up on this, and you trust me to serve as an emissary or messenger to deliver any questions and challenges that we don't cover tonight. What if I disappoint you? What if you end up believing that I did not deliver on my promise or even betrayed the trust that you placed in me? If you feel that I betrayed your trust, and if you feel that important issues raised by natural gas development in Boulder County or elsewhere got squished or ignored, the Center of the American West will hold a public event in which you will have every opportunity to express your dismay and disappointment in me. If you don't want to sit around waiting for that, you can look inside the cover there, and you may tell me at any point over the next few days how you were disappointed by anything I did here. There's an email address in there for that purpose. A final matter to point out, this is not an isolated or standalone event. Our FrackingSENSE series will take the summer off. We'll have two more. May 14th, we'll have Dan Grossman. May 22nd, we'll have Dr. Brent Goldstein. But the series will start up again in the fall. In the next series, I will be inviting speakers who are anti-fracking activists, and I will also be inviting speakers who are forthright advocates for the natural gas industry. All of those speakers will agree to be subject to the intense, wide-ranging questions, often sharp and pointed, from the audience. So those of you who feel that there are perspectives that will not sufficiently be expressed tonight should contact me as soon as possible with speakers that I should be considering for the fall series. As I said, I can't say this enough, I turned in my grades on May 12th, and my opportunities to meet with environmental and community activist groups are going to escalate once I stop grading papers. So those are my opening remarks. I don't know that it would be, I decided my introduction to the governor should be 5 words. And those words are geology, beer, philanthropy, mayor, and governor.
Did it sing on?
No.
We want everything that goes.
Is that,
I've got a little.
does it have a green one?
Oh,
there you are.
Nice. Well, I guess that's electronics. So I thought I'd spend 5 minutes just kind of laying out my context a little bit, and then we'll do questions. So I suspect
We won't do questions. We'll do questions for me, and then we'll do questions for
Right.
him.
Right.
Okay.
That's just a question.
Sorry, a little territorial moment here. Sorry.
And if anything I do tonight dismays you or disappoints you in some way, most of you have already expressed one form of that disappointment, just in raising your hand. And I'm sure there's other times I'm not going to get a hold of, so you could follow up on that as well. I came out here as a geologist. I studied volcanic rocks north of Yellowstone Park. Back in those days, I think pretty much every geologist I knew was an environmentalist. Recently fell in love with rocks, was part of it was the science and this the kind of mystery and magic of trying to understand what was going on far below the ground. But really it was to be out, above timberline and go out. I'd go out for 2.5, 3 weeks in the high Saraka Mountains. Took the eastern boundary, western boundary of Yellowstone, and just took them north for 10 miles. That was my field there. Studied the volcanic deliberation. And unfortunately, there were no jobs in volcanic rocks. So I came out here and had 5 years in the oil and gas business. I worked all over the Rocky Mountains, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, most of the basins in Colorado. And then the price of oil collapsed, and I got laid off. The rest is history. I had to go to a different fluid. Anyway, I am constantly attacked now of being talking about oil and gas and somehow being subservient to their philosophy or their wish. And I look at this. The Quakers have a term called fair witness, where someone really comes in and they don't have an axe to grind. And I realize I've got a long point of persuasion with this group to say that I'm a fair witness in this. That's what I try to do. I was talking to a class of Patty's a couple months ago, and one of her students asked, "Where do you get your facts? Right? Where do you get your facts today?" And it reminded me back of my son, just a few weeks before that. And I'll be ready to make this brief. It's a pretty funny long story. I'll make it brief. But he was complaining about how much homework he had in 5th grade. He's 10. And, I, of course, doing what my parents and grandparents had done to them, said, you'll look back on these days someday. It's the greatest years of your life. All you have to do is go to school and learn. He said, "Dad, you are clueless." That was the stupidest thing you've ever said. He goes, "What do you do that's so hard? You make decisions, right? What's so hard about making decisions? You get the facts, you make a decision, check, next." I said, "Well, I'll tell you, it's not, no. Get your facts, make a decision, check, next." And when Patty's student has pointed out that asked me, where do I get my facts? I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Patty's right. In the end, I gave into it, right? I mean, 5th grade is harder by far. But I think, and I use the best facts I have in trying to address issues around, climate change and the long-term issues facing us around energy, the real importance of energy in lifting people out of poverty. There's really no other way. The 2 engines to really challenge poverty, in my opinion, are energy, inexpensive energy, and education. Right? That's my lifetime of experience. And taking the facts that we have, inexpensive natural gas and how rapidly that, not just in Colorado, but all across the country, has replaced coal plants and dramatically reduced carbon emissions. Now, people fight back. There's some accepted science that we're halfway towards compliance in Kyoto. Some people say, well, that's the economy, or that's not. Certainly, a chunk of it, 10% or maybe a little more than 10% is wind energy. Some people say you don't get that much savings replacing a coal plant with a natural gas plant. But the facts are somewhere in that league. And obviously, I got a master's in geology, and I understand the limitations of science. We're not always going to get to the agreement of facts, but we have to keep working to try and hone in and get better facts and more persuasive facts. So ultimately, all of us, I think, as close as I can tell, the study of the brain, we make our decisions in the end in that kind of inner core cerebellum, right? The old ancestral lizard brain, as my sister calls it. And that's where your emotions live. And we try to create a framework of facts and information that filters some of the impulses of that fight or flight of our ancestral amphibian brain. And I do think, though, that making sure we get the right facts, and as much as humanly possible, keep working towards getting an accepted set of facts will help us make better decisions. So that's
Great, good, thank you.
That's my context.
Okay, I have sent the governor a few topic areas, and I'm going to change the order just a little bit because of where you just left us on the facts issue.
Of course you are.
Please facts.
Oh, Lynn, no, not tonight. Okay, so we're going to start off with, or after the formal session, but, okay. So we're going to begin with the framework of our project, as I think many people in the room know, our NSF project is framed around what we know, what we don't know, and what we hope to learn. And you do not have to do an exhaustive, complete answer to this, but as a geologist, you would have confronted some things that are just very difficult to put together and figure out. So I'm just interested if you could take us through what 2 or 3 items in each of those categories on natural gas and fracking, what we know, what we don't know, and particularly on impacts on air, water, and land and so on.
So, and if I was going to lay out, I mean, I think one of the challenges, I was talking to a friend who before all this fracking, I think was a better friend perhaps than he is now. But there are 2 issues. One is the issues around environmental protection and the quality of our land and water, and the air people breathe. And then the other issue is really almost a land use planning. I mean, how close do we allow, how do we deal with this issue around, wells, oil and gas wells coming in close to neighborhoods, right, where people live, which is, very disorienting and alarming for almost everyone. At least outside of Houston, let's say. That wasn't fair. That was an anti-Texas joke, and I won't tell. No more anti-Texas jokes. So, in terms of what we know about,
People in Houston are getting cancer.
May I ask you? I'm going to give you a direct request to stop speaking so that people can hear the governor.
It's not a joke.
Officers, I'm okay with this person's departing.
Are you asking me to leave?
I am asking you to, actually what I'm pleading with you to do is to stop talking so that we can hear the governor.
Okay, well, please ask him to stop making jokes about people's health. Are you asking me to leave? Please leave.
Well, it looks like goodbye. If you want to come to lunch at the sink, get in touch. Okay.
so the fracking has been going on, what we know about fracking, and inexpensive, or fracking and natural gas, fracking has been going on for several decades. It became in the 90s much more effective, largely a lot of it was through research dollars through a number of universities, a lot of it federal research dollars. Every time some of my more conservative constituents argue that we should diminish funding for solar or wind for the research on that, I always point out that in the 9 years from about 1994 to 2003, our federal government spent close to $6 billion exploring ways to make hydrologic fracturing and horizontal drilling more successful and more effective. And they were looking at that for a lot of national interests, right? Not just economic, but also, the stability of the world. Anyway, so the fracking in Colorado, and I think the earliest wells we know were sometime back in the 1970s. The first well I was ever involved with was hydrologic. It was a vertical well, but they did a hydrologic fracturing, and it has always enhanced the production of wells. So you push this silt in a slurry out into the formation under great pressure. It props open little microfractures, and then when you take the pressure off, it comes back out. The vast majority of that fluid gets pushed out by the formation gas or fluids, and it comes back up the well, and you recovered. And so now they're working, again, we don't know how close they're going to get, but their goal is to get to 100% recycling. They're certainly not there yet, but they are dramatically closer. Anyway, that production increase, once they figured out how to do horizontal drilling, it allowed them to go into formations that were, shale formations that were too tight, that were never historically productive, and dramatically lowered the cost of getting gas, and we know that. We know that worldwide, this is one of the most transformational innovations in the last 50 years and maybe the last 100 years in terms of how we think about energy and what the cost of energy is. What we don't know now that there are a number of issues have been raised, not just here but all around, of the safety
What is the effect of hydrologic fracturing on groundwater? What is the safety, the consequences of producing this gas? How much of it escapes, and what does that do to air quality? Some of the facts we do know is that we can't find an example where the actual fracturing, where you actually do the hydraulic fracturing, where that has pushed the frac fluids up into the formation. Just hasn't. We can't find an example of that in all these 30 years that we've done tens of thousands of wells. Now there are some examples, not hundreds, but more than 10 wells where old wells, whether they were fracked or not, the completion of having, there's a steel pipe that goes down and cement you put around it, where that was done poorly. And these are generally smaller companies, not always. But it is less than 0.01% of all the wells that have done this. And with modern techniques, we now require, when they complete a well, we can measure, we put an electronic tool down the well, and it can diagnose and make sure that that cementing and the completion of that well will be safe, for 100 years. So the parts about what we don't know about the air is, and we got a couple of major research projects, and this isn't something where you wait for 3 years to get it done. I mean, if we find unhealthy air quality around a community or coming out of a well, and it's something that is an issue, trust me, we will put brakes on faster than you can imagine. But we intend to go out in the next little over a year, and we're going to get to every field. We will try and measure every well just to make sure that there isn't leakage of methane, right? The natural gas isn't leaking out. We know for a fact in Utah there was an example of a well that was just, it had a terrible leak and it was affecting air quality. And they hadn't looked at, they don't know how long, they don't believe it was there for very long, but who knows? There's no facts there. And then ultimately what we hope to find out is to be able to make sure that we can absolutely, give people assurance that their air, their water will be protected. And that's, I guess, the real challenge here is to make sure people, again, we've been drilling oil well, producing gas and producing oil close to people's homes throughout Colorado for, 60, 70, 80 years. In the rural areas, people think nothing of putting a well 100 feet, 200 feet from people's homes. But these are people that grew up with that and accept it and don't see it as something that's highly risky. Doesn't mean that we don't want to make sure that we protect their water, their air, just as much as we protect the air and water in Boulder or Denver or Colorado Springs.
Okay, I think my 10 points here are looking rigid and constricting, so I'm just going to follow up from a couple of things you mentioned here because it's not like either of us to go. And my second question is, so I'm not going to do that. That's not the first time that's happened, but it was my notes that got thrown across the room the last time that happened, so I'm holding on to these. I would like to challenge you on a few things here, and one of them is a pattern in the industry of saying there has never been a proven incident of water troubles from fracking, and then there's an effort to define fracking appropriately and accurately and narrowly as what happens 8,000 or 9,000 feet beneath the earth. But in fact, a well that starts at the surface is part of that enterprise, right. And it is a little parsing of grammar.
Where we've had contamination is the well starts at the surface, and by the time they do fracking, it's got a steel pipe the entire length down, and it's got cement for, I don't know, it's the first couple thousand, it depends on it. It's at least 1,200 feet, and depending on where the water table is, it'll go down even further. I don't know exactly what the footage is, but it's well beyond what experience teaches that you need to protect. And when the fracking, the perforations in the well where the frac fluid comes out are in Colorado somewhere 8,000, 9,000, so almost 1.5 miles or 2 miles below where we have groundwater. So that pressure of all that rock is unimaginable that fracking could push fluids up through that. I mean, these are impermeable beds. That's the reason the gas has been has been collected there for so long is because despite all this pressure, it couldn't get forced out.
I'm not a geologist, as I may have made clear, but hanging out with geologists and hydrologists, I have come upon a concept of the mystery of the subsurface. I believe I came into this thinking that there was X-ray vision in your people and that you could see.
That's called seismic lines.
Yeah, right. And you do seismic stuff, but you cannot do it everywhere. And there are mysteries. There are vertical fissures. There are things that we could be standing on the surface of the earth, and there
Sure.
they be, and we wouldn't know that. So I guess what I'm wondering is why not enhance the acknowledgement of uncertainty a little bit?
I think that's fair. And I think that's something that I've learned that just the language. Science is never perfectly exact, but if there were those fissures and there were those places where during the process of hydraulic fracturing, that you had gas and fluid coming up, it would keep coming up, right? And you would have plumes and flares, and then there'd be oil splattered all over the place, and you'd see it.
Okay, but if we went to Windsor, and the episode in Windsor, it seems not crucial to me to make a technical distinction as to whether that was...
The process of fracturing, right.
Right, because to get down to where you're fracturing, you do things closer to the surface, and those things can have consequences, and it could, I would think, infuriate some of the folks who might have been raising their hands there to have the statement said, but that wasn't fracking.
Well, so that was a pond, is what I believe the accepted theory is, that was supposed to have a polypropylene, a liner on it, and somehow that leaked, and there was, and I guess that's it's an industrial process, and it has to be done properly. One of the bills that's in the legislature right now will dramatically increase the fines for that kind of a problem. So that was a surface leak that went down. We have those problems with all kinds of industrial fluids in all kinds of circumstances way too often. I don't deny that happens too often, but that was not fracturing. So those were chemicals, and we're working hard to try and make, the industry is working hard to try and make chemicals more benign. We're working hard to try and accelerate that so that, the legendary, and this is one of the stupidest things I ever did, was, when there was an experimental frac fluid that one of these industry companies had, that they were very proud of. The CEO was saying how every ingredient was a food additive that had been passed by the FDA. Every single thing in this frac fluid. It was too expensive to use now, but if they could keep going and go to scale, they thought that within a few years they might be able to get to this where it would be food quality fracking fluid, which would solve a lot of their problems. And he said you could drink it. And I said I would, you'd have to drink it first before I would. And of course he then took a sip, and then I took a sip. So that was
the stupidest thing you...
That was pretty ignorant. Well, it wasn't so stupid to do it. It was stupid to ever talk about it. So, because it was taken as diminishing how toxic. I mean, the chemicals in frac fluid are, most of them are things that are in crude oil, right? Benzene, toluene. I mean, these are fairly nasty chemicals, but they're the simple, when you see the oil leak out of your oil pan on the bottom of your garage, it's the same stuff. This is stuff that, as a society, we've been letting go down into our curbs and down into our sewers and into our waters as all of our cars have leaked. Right? This is not good stuff. I'm not in any way protecting that, but it was a stupid thing to say that I was, that I sipped frac fluid. You're the last people that are ever going to hear about it. At least now you've got the context.
Okay, so we're not really having, I think, that much of a disagreement, but I would like to just go one more quick round on this. I was at Harvard. I was an assistant professor. I was talking to a lawyer.
I could have never gotten into Harvard, just so clear.
Leslie, it is not
clearly that was the point.
That's the point. I just wanted to say he was at Harvard and he wasn't. That was my only point. Now we can go on. So, okay. So I was at Harvard. I was not a student. I was an assistant professor, but I was talking to a law professor. Yeah. Okay, so this law professor and I are sitting, we're at a social gathering, and we're sitting on a sofa, and he has a glass of red wine, and I have a white skirt on, and we are talking about nuclear power. And he says to me, he's a defender of nuclear power, supporter of that, and he says, I say something about human error being a concern. He says, we don't have to worry about human error. This is very managed. We can control human error. And maybe 8 minutes into his rap, he knocks over his glass of red wine and my white skirt. is a red skirt at that point, or a purple skirt. So that fact of human error, would you and I, like the industry, to take a more flexible stand on saying we do our best, but we are human beings, and now and then something that no one wanted or intended.
Right, I think that is fair to say, and I think part of what the state's job is to make sure that we have a regulatory environment that diminishes as much as possible, and make sure that there's every safeguard that the serious accidents don't happen, and that we look at in every case. So we now have approved rulemaking that's going to require every time anyone drills a well in Colorado, they're going to have to test if there are up to 4 water wells around where that oil location is going to be. They're going to have to go and pay for, the oil company is going to pay for water testing from an independent chemist to make sure that we have a baseline of what the water conditions are in that well. And then they will have to go back and test after the well's drilled. And to my knowledge, there's not another state in America that does post-drilling testing of the wells, right? And they're going to go back and drill, at some time later down the line. In places in fields like the Wattenberg, I mean, we will end up with literally hundreds and hundreds of water wells that will give us ultimately we'll be able to have a real map of oftentimes these are horizons, different horizons of water at different places. But we'll be able to map those over time.
And I want to get to regulation in a moment, but I want to go back to something you said in the opening about this proximity to residences and the trouble of that. And for me, in this project, I'm not getting on top of this because I have had one nightmare where I dreamed that Houston's and my house had been discovered to have a good source beneath it, and I was at peace with that because I have said to others, this is a resource that we use. Our house is heated by natural gas, and in the dream, I was at peace with the fact that I had to stand up and accept this, but I did not like the fact that there was a drilling rig over our bed with heavy equipment.
I thought my dreams were bad.
Well, join us on this project. You don't know what you're going to come up with next in your dreams. So that fact that people lived in areas that they saw as tranquil, as a refuge from a hairy world, a place to go, are we back to Jimmy Carter land of life is unfair? That's something that it's a resource that I will say this, and the governor's not saying this, but I will say that it is a puzzle to me how people whose homes are heated by natural gas can get to such a high ground of condemnation of the production of that product. He did not say that. That would be me saying that. And that's why in the dream I was actually trying to live on that principle. But what do we say about that inequity, that some people have it in proximity to their homes and some people don't?
So, 2 things. One, and this is scant solace, but when I was mayor of Denver, we had a number of issues over cell phone towers and the intrusion along the edge of parks, where people's neighborhood, what they had seen. And it was funny, I was sitting there one day, and one of the most popular parks in Denver is Congress Park, which is right near the Botanic Gardens. All the time, full of people. I was sitting there looking and at the top of that hill, the most beautiful part of that, is a communications center for the fire department and the police department in Denver. It's got the largest, ugliest tower, but it's been there for 50 years, and no one ever brings it up. And so there's a challenge there. Now, that's scant solace to someone who's already established their expectation of what their future is going to look like. And, I don't have a good answer. We have a system here called the split estate. And back in the early 1900s, to encourage mining and oil and gas exploration, what we allowed to happen, and we all did this, the locals drove this, was that they would segregate the sale of the mineral rights underneath people's land. So someone would own the surface, and someone else would pay money for the land. And now you have all kinds of, and especially when you're on the further north, on the Eastern Plains, but you have retirees and people who, a significant part of their life savings is in the mineral rights that they bought or that they were involved in or they inherited, that they've counted on. And our law for 80-some years has said that they have a legitimate right to access from that surface land, right, with minimum disruption, but from that surface land to access that oil, that gas, whatever the minerals are, the gold, the silver. And it is, you could not, from someone in my position, you could not imagine a worse system, because it creates a natural adversarial position where someone is going to come in, someone's going to have something that they thought was theirs, that was going forward, and yet someone else has a legal right to come in and pay money for it. And if you take that from them, is that fair? That's what I think we're all trying to work through, is how do we find a way to balance that intrusion into people's communities with the legitimate and long-standing property rights of individuals and companies.
I'm going to now attack the hypocrisy of the suburbs, and you're going to defend the suburbs from my attack. Because as a Western American historian, and in no time at all,
I grew up in a suburb.
The hecklers will be after me in a moment here.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
So it's possible. Okay, so I'm going to say, but as a historian, I cannot see how I could avoid saying this, that these suburbs around the Denver metro area, many of them are products of white flight and the effort to avoid the racial complexity of the city of Denver years ago, not at this moment, but years ago. They are made possible by heavy fossil fuel use. They're made possible by car commuting, by all of the infrastructure of roads, and that the lawns themselves, there's fertilizer produced by natural gas, the homes are heated by natural gas. In the 1970s, the greatest cause of environmental alarm in this region was sprawl, was the spread of suburbs. So I have now said, if I were going to take some of those positions, I would want to live in downtown Boulder.
Which you can't afford.
Which I can't
anymore.
afford, so there you are, which besides that.
Well, because, and this was when I first opened the Wine Coop Brewing Company in Lower Downtown back in 1988. We signed the lease in 87. And that was so abandoned down there. The rent was $1 a square foot per year. No one wanted to be there. And my partners and I, one of the things we consciously said in our first interview, or second interview, was that we thought ultimately we wanted to do lofts down there, and we wanted to create a community where people could walk to work. Because long term, a more pedestrian life is less stressful, it gives you more time, it is cleaner for the environment, we don't need as many hydrocarbons. I mean, we had all the same arguments back then, and there were about a half dozen other similar-minded people that, we went after it and worked together. We tried to create a sense of place. Honestly, I think that's the single, it's not like I'm a good debater, and that's why I got elected mayor, was that was a vision of what people want. And in the last 15 years, I think they're up to about 33 or 34,000 housing units have been built in the core part, in the close-in downtown part of Denver. And people do finally want to live there. And it's part of I look at it as every bit of, land use planning is every bit as important as replacing coal plants with natural gas, as trying to do as many things as rapidly as we can if we're really going to address climate change. Because I think climate change, we don't see it. It's happening at a rate that it's very hard to measure because it's at such a scale, and there's been enough mispredictions along the way that there's still widespread skepticism. Even now, over the last 5 years, we see widespread skepticism. But I think most of you buy insurance on your homes, right? And you don't think you're going to have an electrical fire in your house, but the bottom line is we buy insurance. And this country probably should be spending, $50 or $100 billion a year just as insurance, even if you didn't believe in climate change.
Well, look at that, climate change, my next note here. Well,
Go for it. Now you have to find a better question.
I think if I'm now going to jump to the defense of the people that I just attacked and say that I think a good share of those people would really prefer to be getting their energy from renewable sources if they could, and they are not people who can move that infrastructure, who feel that they don't know they're not set up to do that. So in the context of climate change, and especially in terms of thinking of natural gas as a bridge to a much, much, much less carbon-oriented energy source, how does that work? And is it working? And can we see evidence that natural gas is actually serving as that bridge to a renewable economy and the renewable energy economy and the reduction of climate change greenhouse gases?
Well, 2 points. One is that we as a community have to maintain vigilance, and I think there should be, you know, if Congress tries to reduce our willingness to invest in the research that allows, if you look at the cost curve, solar electricity is down, I don't know, huge amounts. It's over 65, over 2/3 in the last 10 or 15 years. Wind is probably down 27 to 35%, I think the last numbers I saw over that same period. And that's A, research, and B, manufacturing more, providing subsidies so that you can begin to produce this stuff at scale. So first we have to make sure that we continue that effort to bend that cost curve down. And then second, you know, what the benefit is we're getting as a bridge, again, that's where we could get hung up over facts. And the 2 studies I've seen, which seem credible to me, they've recently, you know, now people, I think there's another 2 studies going to go out and recheck that math, but they think that we've cut, you know, our per capita carbon emissions are down, you know, down to the same place where they were when Eisenhower turned over the White House to Kennedy, is the line I always use on that, and that we are halfway to getting to complying with Kyoto, even though we didn't sign on to Kyoto. Regardless of how much it is, I think it is going to come out, whatever study comes out, it'll be converting coal plants to natural gas will be a very significant way of reducing our carbon emissions in real time. And I mean, many of the people in this room, I'm going to guess, have been, you know, rattling sabers and arguing for a green economy, more solar, more wind for, I don't know, a couple decades. I've been doing it for 3 decades. And how much good did we get out of it? We got some benefit. Now we've got for the last 8 years, we've had some, or 9 years, we've had some serious research and really begin to make some progress, but that's been a heck of a battle. You know, natural gas, inexpensive natural gas, has happened almost without people being aware of it. It's happened so fast, literally like in the last 6 or 7 years. And it is, I think, material. Again, I'm happy to sit down with the facts and make sure that we all get to the same set of facts, but I see it as whether it's 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, but a transition. It doesn't mean we go any less aggressively for wind and solar, but even solar, right? There's several large plans in the San Luis Valley to have, you know, centralized large solar plants down there. And when you go down there and talk to the people, which, I mean, that's how this democracy works. There's a significant number of people that do not want to see another power line going anywhere through their landscape. Nothing. They've had it. That's enough. That's no different than someone having an oil and gas well in their neighborhood. And there's a number of folks that don't want this big, solar farm, this plant in their community. So there are trade-offs, right? Even if you look at the production facility, as we get more successful with solar, we're going to have better batteries. Well, look at the chemicals that are used in those batteries, and start looking at where they come from, because that's a difficult process as well. There's no single easy solution, and we as a community have to roll up our sleeves and have open discussion and come right up to where people are going to disagree with you and maybe shout at you from the audience, but try to listen and say, all right, how do we get to the same set of facts and begin to figure out what the compromises are that we can keep working. When I was a geologist, they had this theory called the theory of multiple working hypotheses. That if you're trying to solve for a problem, you design experiments that won't give you information just for that one solution, but for 3 or 4 or 5 possible solutions, and you do them all at once. Those experiments that give you more information on different possible solutions are the better experiments to run, or the ones you should do first, because we've got to recognize we don't have the answer yet. And we've got to keep going down several roads at once.
The question picker-uppers are going to be circulating, so if you would pass your questions, write your questions and pass them into the aisle. Actually, really the hope of the future. These are not just the people picking up questions. These are three, well, one has a master's degree already, but the other two are in graduate school, and they are the hope here. So we will soon be passing the baton on, but meanwhile, pass your questions to them before we pass the baton. So I would like to follow up on that with the matter, and I will offer my impression, and you tell me whether you have had this as well. It seems to me that many discussions of the role of natural gas as we move to a renewable future will derail because of people on one side, the industry people saying, natural gas industry people saying, renewables are an insignificant sector and they are not going to grow very fast. And it's odd for me to hear that because it seems to me that they might say renewables will grow as fast as they can, but wind will need firming, wind will need evening out. So I don't quite understand why we go off the rails into that conversation. But I also don't understand why on the environmentalist side there couldn't be that's overstated, excuse me, on the anti-fracking side to say, okay, natural gas will have to think a lot harder about this bridge and this transition. It's not a very clearly engineered bridge, but we don't have to get into a fight on the timing of the transition to renewable energy because we could all join behind that and we don't have to fight about whether it's 20 years or 50 years or 192 years. It's my impression that that conversation really takes us off a track of productive discussion, and I don't know if that's something that you...
Energy source for wind, and that when, a coal plant that generates electricity, when it cycles down, if you turn it off as the wind picks up, and then you turn it back up when the wind dies down, it is filthy, right? In those transitions, it is very inefficient and very dirty. And natural gas cycles up and cycles down very efficiently, is much, much cleaner, and therefore, I've said this to many of the oil and gas companies that their natural partners should be the wind and the solar energy firms, and that they should be committing themselves to some real goals in terms of what a future economy looks like around energy.
And this question, the answer to this question may just be no, but for some reason, someone who happened to be me wrote it and thought, I must ask that. Is there a possibility that you are holding positions that might inadvertently delay the shift to renewable energy? And I stress inadvertently.
Sure, no. You're giving me the benefit of the doubt. I know what's in your heart. You've been very gracious, and I appreciate that. It's been a long week. That's possible. I mean, I'm not going to say. I do think that you look at the issues around cost of energy, and it is, I met 2 weeks ago with a couple of developers that do data centers, right? And we are natural. We should have more data centers here than anywhere. But data centers are incredibly energy sensitive, right? The cost of energy becomes vitally important. And so we have some, but most of them are down in Colorado Springs where we have the least expensive energy, the oldest coal plant, to be blunt. There's a balance. There's got to be a balance to that cost of energy when you look at, how rapidly can we get to a green economy that's going to support people that are living, hand to mouth, but really where every dollar in a month that goes to their household budget is vitally important. And when I support, inexpensive natural gas, which means I support, directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing, my goal is to in no way slow down the growth of renewables. But even now, the legislators talking about asking the co-ops in the rural areas to increase the amount of renewable energies that they get, and they're going nuts, and their customers are going nuts. And historically, the state's never, if you remember, this state voted as a state to get the large utilities to support renewable energy goals and commit to them. And then the legislature, in partnership with Excel and the large utilities, increased those several years ago. We've never really gone out and given an edict that you are going to pay more for your energy in rural areas because we think you should be greener. And I mean, these issues raise difficult questions.
Shifting to the topic of state, federal, county, municipal authority, and I cannot help myself as an historian. If you didn't get your question picked up yet, they will sort I've done this myself, it's very many, they'll sort they're so silly over there. They're sorting questions, and then they'll start bringing us questions, and then they'll make another tour of the audience on that. But that is the most strenuous activity on the planet. You may think that demanding physical exercise is harder, but taking those questions and getting a pattern, that's really hard.
It's even harder than 5th grade.
It is. It's comparable hard. So as a historian, I cannot stop myself from thinking this is the big story of federalism. Our founding fathers worked away at this, of how to allocate authority in a way that wouldn't be dangerously centralized or dangerously decentralized. So can we put the struggles over natural gas regulation into at least start there, in a bigger framework of this ongoing contest or dance or set of negotiations in the United States about where authority should sit and how much it should be in the federal government, how much it should be in the state, how much it should be in counties and municipalities, and how much it should just be in the individual citizen's soul. So if that's not too dizzying.
Well, and that's the question of local control versus state control, and the state control versus federal control. Of course, I think the federal government is not capable of recognizing the unique situations that occur in all the different locations and basins in different states. The issues we face here are so different than what they're facing in Pennsylvania and New York. I mean, they are just completely different universes in terms of what the issues are. In terms of within a state, what we've tried to do, and again, our Constitution gives this regulatory authority to our Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, is to try to create as much flexibility as possible, but with the state authority. So Arapahoe County, I think recently, in the last week, let's say, has completed a very, very difficult negotiation with the hand in glove with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, where they set a number of very stringent requirements in terms of what oil and gas companies would have to do to explore for oil and gas and produce oil and gas in Arapahoe County. They did not go and make rules that made it illegal, but they certainly are creating a context whereby the oil and gas companies are going to have real benefit by sitting down at the table with them and negotiating, and within a very rigorous framework. We allow there to be local government designees, so each county is allowed to have a designee that comes and represents that county in the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Committee to make sure that their specific issues for their county are heard. And I think not all the small population counties have a local government designee, but I think 50, maybe 52 of these local government designees are out there, and these are where the compromises have happened in counties like Arapahoe County or Gunnison County, where, again, people have moved, in many cases have retired to what they thought was their beautiful piece of Colorado, and then all of a sudden it turns out that there's oil and gas potential right next door, and in some cases it's been underneath their land. And what we've been trying to do is make sure that the counties have as much authority, but making sure that the state still has ultimate responsibility, which is what the Constitution says.
I want to go back and we'll have a little chat with James Madison in a moment, but we're going to put that out for a second here.
I thought we were going to have a little chat with James Martin, who just stepped down as...
Well, there's another person to chat with. For some reason,
equally wise, I would say.
For some reason, my stumbling there, I was trying to say James Madison, and I started to say Jim Madison, as if I were on a close personal basis with our founding father, which I am not. So I want to go back there, but I want to talk about reforming and changing the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, not just in your time as governor, but before that, and the unexpected twist from this. That seems like a very challenging and very illustrative and illuminating process, and taking a kind of, I'll just say, settled, I won't say rigid, but I'll just say settled agency and bringing it along into a new era. And the punchline is going to be, so you will sort of walk us through the changes in how that organization is defined, that agency is defined and run, and then you'll say whether you think it is easier to change COGCC than it is to change the faculty at any university in the state of Colorado.
Or how do they both compare to gun laws?
That was my James Madison is never going to get in here at this rate, so yeah.
Well, I think, you know, I think Governor Ritter deserves a tremendous amount of credit. That he and Jim Martin and Harris Sherman changed something that had literally been unchanged for 75 years probably. And it was a huge amount of effort and a lot of negotiation and issues around process. They did that rulemaking, took them a better part of almost a year and a half, I think. We've done the last 2 years, we've done 3 separate rulemakings, right? So we've addressed the transparency of frac fluid, which again, we had public hearings, outreach, made sure everybody was heard. We went back, I can't tell you how many people told me that you will never get these two sides to agree, the oil and gas industry will fight this. But after, 6 or 8 months, we did get the oil and gas industry and the environmental industry to say, all right, this isn't perfect, but we both stand by this. So that was the first. Then we just finished about 14 months worth of 2 rulemakings, one on increasing the setbacks for the first time in ages, but from 350 feet back to 500 feet, which again affects the value of many people's assets who have mineral rights close to suburban communities, and this was very, very contentious. And some of the contention was not the oil and gas industry as much as people that own those mineral rights, right? That had invested money or had inherited whatever. They had something that was worth one amount, and we changed it. And that is a very difficult process. But we got that done. And now the water testing, which I've heard it said that it's not sufficient and that we should have done more. But it is, again, my opinion, the most rigorous water regulatory environment around oil and gas in the country. It's the only state that after the well is drilled, you go back and ask to get an additional water testing.
Is there a robust conversation between the Marcellus Shale folks? And are you chatting with Governor Cuomo about? And probably it's confidential, so I probably shouldn't have asked that. But he's in an interesting position now. How is that conversation proceeding of the Marcellus Shale people in Pennsylvania and New York? And are they drawing lessons from the Rockies?
I think what's happening, which is interesting, and Pennsylvania is wide open. I mean, in both cases, their shale is so much closer to the surface and closer to groundwater than what we have out here. It's not analogous in that scientific sense. However, it is interesting that New York has no fracking. They're not doing horizontal drilling and going after the shale gas, whereas Pennsylvania is wide open. And I think if you go into rural Pennsylvania, and this is based on not scientific data, but a half dozen people who live there who I've met or know, and it's about evenly divided. There's a lot of people that hate it. Their landscape is changing in ways they never wanted. There's half the people that say, God, we haven't had jobs, we haven't had an economy here in ages, and they embrace it. And what's going on in the scientific community is they are measuring living daylights, or just starting to measure, to see if there are environmental examples of hydraulic fracturing at shallow levels that's going to contaminate groundwater. So far, they haven't found it, or at least that's the information that I've been given. Again, the source of facts being what it is, but we're trying to establish a centralized database because this is going to have a lot to do with how regulation evolves in the country.
Oh, and then, okay. I'm not going to press you on the comparison to higher education and changing higher education, but I am going to give you the I love CU button. I meant to give you at the start. Okay. So, and I don't know if you can wear that without compromising your relationships with.
How many people here are from CSU?
Oh, no, that person was handing in a question.
Yeah, so I think
okay, so it's you say, so you can be spared that.
I do love CU. CU is a great resource. That Boulder now, and this is part who's attracted to Boulder, part of CU, is the #1 entrepreneurial city in America, right? There are more patents, more startups per capita going on here than anywhere else, and it is really, people are I've heard this from 4 other governors, people are coming from other states to see how is this working in Boulder, and CU is a huge part of it.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Well, what a kind remark. Thank you.
National Geographic.
Oh, okay, I beg your pardon. What a kind remark. Sir, I'm going to ask you to stop talking so we can continue our conversation, or I'm going to wait to see what to say before we can continue another conversation. Well, that was nice, saying thank you first. That was nice. I know that. We did not do that when I was a girl. I don't recall we ever said thank you to Governor Reagan when he came to visit us in Santa Cruz. So, Longmont, we're about to, Lynn, no, really, no more talking.
Papers.
Oh, papers. Oh, Lynn, I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Does somebody have a blank note that they could give her? Well, we'll get, somebody will bring you that. Don't worry about that. Okay, sorry for that. Excuse me. Longmont. We're going to Longmont in a moment here. But we're going to go there first just with something that has amused me, because I've heard so many people say this, that local government people complaining about the imposition of state authority or being secondary to the state use almost exactly the same language and rhetoric as state people talking about the feds interfering with it.
Absolutely.
And so somebody's writing the same script.
So in both cases, there's a balance, and there's an appropriate place in both the relationship between federal government regulating state governments, and between state governments, how they regulate municipalities and counties.
So, sorry, we're just making sure that Lynn gets heard.
It's not black and white. It hasn't been. If you go back and read James Madison, I mean, he's explicit in the conflict that is inherent in the system of government, but he felt that and I'm not a historian, so I'm going to get in trouble. I shouldn't even be going out on this limb as probably the slowest reader in this room. It takes me like 2 months to get through even the greatest historical work. But the natural zeroing out of conflicting self-interests is what he thought would allow states and municipalities to work out this balance, and would allow the federal government and the states to work out because you would have self-interests that oftentimes are at odds with each other, arguing against each other, and that would provide the lubrication that would allow you to ascertain what is appropriate, where are all of us best served, and by that I mean the people of all the different political persuasions, all the different opinions. How do we get to that place where it's a fair compromise with everyone between both of those conflicts?
And I'm going to say now to the young folks, I think the original plan was that you would bring me the things to read, but there is no point in my struggling to get my glasses and figuring out what you've read, because it would be more engaging, I think, if you folks came over and borrowed my mic and read some of the questions when we get to that. It'll be like another 5 minutes before we're there. So, but it seems, well, goodness, everyone's so happy that we'll hear from the young folks and not me. So, okay, so prepare for reading. You got 5 or 6 minutes to do that. And we're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about public service and your own. Well, you've kind of done that. That you have to be in a situation where there is a considerable spectrum of opinion. The students in my class are pretty unanimous in saying they would not want to be public servants, that they would not want to be involved in this. And I just wonder, are there some issues that are more satisfying to take on, or are there some issues where you just have to think, this can't be anything but a test of resolution or determination? I don't know. This question is...
Well, this is a cakewalk compared to gun safety. Right, it is. I mean, when you get people, when I went out to Grand Junction a month ago, and I had 250 people out there that wanted to, hung me in effigy, wanted to recall me, because we did universal background checks, right? And I'm not diminishing the questions of public safety, and I take, I'm not trying to make light of any of that, but this is a more cordial conversation. Even when I went up to Longmont and, they thumped the car with the posters, people get agitated today about everything, and it does make public service harder, right? I worked for 16 years. I worked 70 hours a week to build my restaurant company because I was obsessed and neurotic about having enough. My mom grew up in depression. I needed to be financially secure, and once I got financially secure, it was like, oh, so I killed myself to do this, and it just everyone in my restaurants were so cynical about every elected official. Everybody was a bum. Everybody was a corrupt or in it for their ego. And we had this over several months, this discussion about, hey, this is the original experiment in democracy, right? If we can't figure it out, how the heck can we expect the rest of the world to figure it out and deal with some of these tough questions? And I mean, I can only imagine we're getting ready to go out and discuss the death penalty, right, and capital punishment, and Nathan Dunlap. Again, a thing that just, for certain people, becomes just an intensely emotional experience. And, I think, if we can't get more people like yourselves, people who've got business experience or experience in running nonprofit, big enterprises, but more people to spend some period of their time, 5 or 10 or 15 years, to go into government, we're going to have a hard row to hoe. We're going to have a hard time. And to a certain extent, that's, as we have all these discussions, and the ones that really grip us most emotionally, and trust me, I've got my hot points, and I'm not without a temper, right? And Alan Salazar would tell you that. He says he's never seen it. Never seen it. Alan is our head of strategic, what is it, Vice President of Strategic Affairs?
Something like that.
Yeah, he can't remember. Anyway, he is the calm, sound one. But if we can't get all of us to tone down those places where we get heated, we're going to have a hard time moving to the next level. And again, the world's changing so fast that I think we should all have a sense of urgency about how do we. It's the same thing with attack ads, right? I mean, this is getting angry at someone you disagree with is not so dissimilar from just resorting to an attack ad. And attack ads work, right? There's no question. I can honestly say, when I ran for mayor twice and governor, I've never done an attack ad, right? When they attacked me in the governor's race, I did the shower ad and made fun of it. But they work, right? And we're aware, I mean, there's a reason why Coke doesn't do an attack ad against Pepsi. It would work. Pepsi's sales would go down, Coke would go up, but then Pepsi would have to do an attack ad against Coke. And then Coke would have to attack Pepsi, and Coke's sales would go down, Pepsi's sales, and they would diminish the entire product category of soft drinks. People would be buying less soft drinks, and yeah, yay! I'm going to use a different metaphor now. I can't use that metaphor in Boulder. We are diminishing the product category of democracy, and I think that the intense anger that comes out in public meetings, the unwillingness to try and hear someone else's point of view is just another form of the attack ad.
And that is actually getting, by the way, I thought you were talking about the Koch brothers when you said Koch.
Coca-Cola is so defensive. The head of their bottling was quick to point out a few weeks ago that 40%, now this is happening every year, but 40% of their products now have no sugar in them at all. I said, that's impossible. He said, no, it's either water or completely diet, totally no sugar at all. And he says, you give us a few more years, it'll be at 50 and 60.
Well, this is so
Put a thumb,
spirit-lifting.
put a thumb.
I can't think how we got such a happy topic, but I would like to shift this from that. I had my last class in my Western American Studies this afternoon, and I said that one of the great changes in the last 30 or 40 years was the rise of negotiation over litigation in much Western, what's been very still scenes of conflict. So the Longmont lawsuit, I did not mention that when I said it to the students, that we were seeing a great shift from litigation to negotiation. So any reflections you wanted?
Well, and I'll say, I mean, I opened 16 restaurants, each one is a separate LLC or small business with its own up to 35 investors. I had over 400 investors in all those companies. We had 4 real estate companies that built lofts in Lodo, and we'd have over 1.5 million customers a year. And I've never been in court. We've always worked out every business deal, every customer deal. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. We've always figured out, and my partners sometimes say we're giving up too much or we should fight for it. I'm sure, I'm ticking off a bunch of the lawyers out here, I'm sure. Put you guys out of business. But it's, when Longmont, when you ban fracking, when you really say that, that you're going to supersede the state's authority, and I think, I mean, right now, pretty much any recovery of oil or gas uses fracking. So basically, if you're saying you're not going to have fracking in your community, you're saying you're not going to have any oil and gas exploration. And this, in 1993, or 1987 or 88, Greeley did this, and it went all the way up to the state Supreme Court, and they, you know, in a unanimous, or I think it was one dissenting vote, said you can't do that. People have this, in this split estate, the people that own those mineral rights have some rights to get to it. And I think what's interesting now is you go up to Greeley, and there are wells all over in town, not far from schools or homes, and the relationship between the oil and gas community and the community of Greeley has changed dramatically. I think if you went up there and asked them whether they wanted to get this all out of their community, they've become accustomed to it. I'm not suggesting that Longmont should have this outcome, or that Boulder won't have its own unique solutions. But Greeley did come. I mean, you go up there, and there is a very constructive relationship between the oil and gas industry and the community.
Okay, speaking of constructive relationships, do you want to bring your chairs over, or do you want to, I don't know, or do you want to just, what you want me to do is bring my microphone over to you. That's what you want me to do, so, okay.
Is that because they don't want to get too close to me?
We have so many good questions, and we've kind of organized them into sort of governance questions and water questions and big picture energy questions. We've got a few different piles here. But I'm going to go ahead and pull one from the miscellaneous pile, because we thought that would be a good way to start. Topic, marijuana, efficient industry. Question, isn't marijuana regulation a more efficient, environmentally friendly industry than fracking? So I guess maybe you should sort of finish off the question for this person. Do you think that that's a more green industry in terms of state revenues and environmental impacts?
And you know, that is a good one to start on. Because it is, in a funny way, similar. There are a lot of issues, and I grew up in the 60s. I inhaled, I smoked, there were a couple years there I smoked a lot of pot, right? And the bottom line is that the pot today is very different, right? And this is not my opinion, this is the scientific opinion, that concentration of THC is orders of magnitude higher than what it was 40 years ago. And there are a number of top scientists, and I have not found a conclusive study yet, but to believe when brains are still growing, when you're talking about teenagers, and you're talking about 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, they smoke this high octane and inhale this THC, that it could have permanent damage to their memory, their long-term memory. And again, what are the facts, and is this hyperbole from some scientists? Scientists are generally fair witness, especially something about like this. I think that their words should be, we should use their concerns to exercise caution. With the legislation we're trying to fight our way through, because it is an industry now, and there are people with a great deal of money to gain, and the commercial aspect of it has become very significant. But we're trying to make sure that we have enough tax income from it. I think we're looking at a combined between the wholesale and the retail tax, something like 25%, to make sure that we can regulate it appropriately. And also, most kids, and we already are seeing that the fact that we legalize it makes young people feel that it's more acceptable and safer. I think that's pretty much everyone agrees to that fact. And not all kids have the same strength of constitution. There are a lot of kids that have some mental issues, are less secure in themselves, and we're going to lose. Kids are going to slip off the tracks, and there's, at any given time in Colorado, we've got a couple hundred homeless teenagers, living in various towns, many of them in Denver, maybe 250 sometimes. We've been up to 400 or 500 back in the early 2000s. I think that number is going to increase, and we're going to need resources to deal with that and make sure that we have the time and can again, early intervention is much more successful. But in that sense, we don't know all the facts about what marijuana is going to be. And certainly the war on drugs was one of the worst failures this country ever had. And putting so many kids into jail, giving them felony records, having the gang activity and the violence in neighborhoods throughout the country was a huge, just a inconceivable waste of money and time and people's lives. But I think, like any change, we're going to have some real challenges as we go through this. It's not going to be as easy as people think.
Okay, Jason.
So, marijuana can be a detour. This is a combination of questions that we got in many forms from the audience, so I think we're going to be satisfying a lot of people's questions here. Given the recent spill in Parachute Creek, I'm worried about my area. What are specific things you will do as our governor to protect our health and keep us safe? Protect the land and water and our outdoor and tourism industries that our outdoor and tourism industries rely on. And to follow up with that, how do you feel about the oil and gas industry being exempt from the Clean Air and Clean Water Act? That's all the detail we got, but we got that question probably 10 times.
Right. So they're not exempt from our state regulations, our state laws, and that is why they are at Parachute right now spending thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars a day, making sure that leak doesn't continue and doesn't get into the stream, and why they're going to clean it up. As I said, we are looking right now at increasing fines, and dramatically. I mean, I think the existing fine is something like $1,000 a day. We're looking at going to $15,000 a day, right? That's a big difference, right? And ultimately, if you want to make sure that that kind of an accident doesn't happen, you put a large enough constraint on it, you put it to the point where they cannot afford to let it happen. And I'm going to guess that our fines were not sufficient to cause, to make sure that they invested the precautionary resources to make sure that didn't happen. I'm not sure there's another way to explain it. There is no guarantee. I mean, no different than trains falling over with chemicals or, all kinds of risks that are around us. I think we need to be more vigilant, right? It's a parallel issue is the question of fugitive methane, of methane escaping from, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but there's a scientist working at CSU who thinks he's on to being able to have a meter that will measure methane that will be inexpensive enough that they'll be able to put that on every well in Colorado. So that we'll be able to have real-time measuring and collecting that information so that we can measure everything, right? It's the 21st century. I think one of the issues about the Parachute leak was that it evidently went on for several months and we didn't catch it. It's the 21st century. We should demand that we have the technology in place so that those don't go undetected for such a long period.
Federal laws.
Sorry. If you want to write a question, we'd be happy to have that. Okay.
He asked it.
Oh, he asked the question. Okay, so I'm sorry. So the question was more about.
Why the exemption from the.
Thank you. That's
the federal. Again, that happened in whatever it was, 2004, 2005, 2006. I was not part of that discussion. I don't know what the arguments were. I do know that the state will hold them accountable, right? For any kind of groundwater damage, our requirement is that they have to compensate, if someone's using that water for their ranch or their farm, or if it's a community's groundwater, the culpable company is held fully responsible. And as we add these fines on, the federal laws will be the least of their problems.
Okay, Sam, thank you. Sorry for that.
So again, this is a question that was raised a number of times. This person is asking, how is all this natural gas infrastructure being paid for, and how is the decommissioning of the wells being paid for?
How is the decommissioning of the wells, and how's the natural gas? By natural gas infrastructure, you mean the pipes and
I assume pads and pipes.
moving it around? So that's the exploration companies pay for that, and the additional exploration creates additional fees that they pay to the state. So that's how we're I think last time I saw it was tripling the number of inspectors. Is that right, Doug? Doubling, tripling? More than tripling. Jeez, who knows? But anyway, dramatically more inspectors that will be going out with the goal of, again, there's no absolute, letters to the sky that tell us how often you have to go visit a gas well. Most of them just sit there and chug away. But to make sure that we're doing enough, I think we're going to try and get to every well, once a year, once every 18 months. I mean, on much more frequently than we ever had before, because there's this uncertainty, right? And the public trust is important. What was the other part of that?
The infrastructure and the long-term, the decommissioning.
Oh, the decommissioning of the wells. So, and that's a place that we've had problems before, and the key here is to make sure that you have, in very rare instances, what they've tried to do, and we are not allowing them, is to take what are called, what is the word they call for the wells that just are down to like 5 barrels a day? They're called what? Strippers. Strippers. I knew there was a word, a good technological word like strippers. Sorry. But there were some shenanigans. I think what that question is about is packaging them together, selling them to a small company, transferring the responsibility for making sure that they're plugged, and that the 20 years, 50 years from down the road, that those wells don't get they don't fall apart, and then you have trace oil and gas and stuff communicating with groundwater. The key to this is to make sure, and I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but to make sure that we have a sufficient amount of money that these companies post a bond that guarantees that they will be able to complete plug the wells, which means you put concrete down there that seals up, doesn't allow the horizons to communicate with each other. I don't know what that bond is. Do you know what the...
Depends on how many wells. It's $20,000 up to a certain number of wells, and $100,000 for what they call blanket
Right.
bond.
So anyway, it's big dollars, and it's something that I think historically was not something was sufficiently guarded against.
We had a couple people. No, battery's in. We had a couple people following up on the where you get your facts point. And I think the best wording, the most specific question that I got is this one. How can we make sure that information about hydraulic fracturing that the public and government are relying on is accurate, relevant, and in the proper context? Do we need scientific standards and peer review to be applied?
Boy, that's a technical question. So we have, and how do we know we're getting the right facts? I'm not sure. I think that's the question I started this evening with, right? How do we trust that the information we're getting is reliable? And I am, having worked in a variety of industries, I think most people are trying to do the best thing they can. Doesn't mean you don't have corrupt people, oftentimes at very high levels, that make dreadful decisions and decisions that are reckless, right? Take risks. They'll fudge information and take risks that are insufficient. With fracking, I think the real question then, if we're going to try and establish some standards, is to make sure that we are measuring those places where we think there could be contamination, right? And which is clearly groundwater. And I think that's what we're doing now, is making sure that we test 4 water wells around each oil well before they drill it. and then we go back and do water testing after the well is drilled, and then several years later after the well is drilled. I'm not, we have hydrologists that work for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Committee, a couple of other agencies in the state government, and we've relied on them to try and say, all right, what is that balance that we can make sure we're not putting our groundwater at risk. And I think industry, however, I mean, the vast majority of industry has the same interest, right? They don't want to contaminate any water. The people don't want to do it. The company doesn't want to do it. The stockholders don't want to do it. Most of the larger companies have been requesting more regulation, right? Requesting higher fines, because they know when the little companies that are more fly-by-night and are more likely to cut corners, that hurts everybody, and it creates a mistrust, and it affects everybody, even the most responsible companies. It affects their ability to do business. So, setting up a regime of water testing so that and keeping that database active and transparent, so that we require independent water tests and that we post that data so that the public can get at it easily, is probably, I think, the best, in this particular case, the best thing we can. I don't think, obviously testing, now that we have a transparency in terms of what are the components of frac fluid, so that they have to release what's going down that hole, I assume that we can have inspectors that can test that and verify that on a spot check basis. But again, it's unlikely that they would deceive that, because there's no benefit they get by putting more harmful materials in frac fluid. They're not going to try and. The performance of a frac fluid is not enhanced by a more harmful material, right? They're trying to make the stuff as benign as possible.
And I know you want to bring this particular response to a conclusion by remarking on the value of our NSF project.
Of course.
And the scientists and engineers working on that. I'm reading your mind, I suspect.
And I was going to say that CU has this research project through the National Science Foundation that is fully technical and is looking at these exact issues of what are the things we need to measure around fracking, and who does it, and how do we ensure reliability.
Okay, so
Sorry about that.
I know the evening is going on, and I know that we are presuming on a long, long day for the governor, so I'm going to propose maybe 2 more questions, and so choose. I know you're choosing carefully already, so okay.
How many really good questions do you have that you think are compelling?
There are a lot of really good questions.
But she's going to make me answer them anyway, right?
Right.
So we can do 3. Pick your 3 best.
Okay, 3. This question came pre-typed. But it seems to very directly address a lot of the concerns that we heard and
Sure.
a lot of the questions. If fracking is safe, how do you explain the headaches, nosebleeds, and neurological symptoms people experience who live near fracking operations? I want to give you a chance to respond to that, because so many people seem to have it on their mind.
Right, and so there is wide disagreement on the data. I mean, there are anecdotal and some, I would say, some very concerning anecdotal stories of people that and I don't think it's connected, at least the stories I've heard, it's not connected to fracking, but it's been connected to the production of oil and gas. And the explanations I've heard are around fugitive methane that is escaping, or other volatiles that certain people are very susceptible to. It's the same. It's the same question of how do we get this data. This is part of why we're doing this comprehensive study of air quality and really trying to address, what are causing those symptoms? Can we analyze them? Are other people having those symptoms? How widespread are people in other parts of the community that don't have oil and gas close to them? Are they getting similar symptoms? And are these truly unique? And what's the preponderance? And we have, to my knowledge, no thorough study of that yet. And that's data we need, and we need it. I think we have 2 studies underway right now looking at that. And up, we're trying to go to where some of those issues are, such as up by Erie.
This person is asking, well, that's kind of a lengthy introduction, but I'll read it anyway. Says, I have heard you talk at other events when you have said that we need more energy so we can continue to increase the population of Colorado and attract more people here. But why is that a good thing? Why do we need more people, which means more sprawl, pollution, more traffic, and just more competition?
So that's a whole separate question, has nothing to do with fracking. And I've never said that we need more energy so that we can attract more people. That connection is abstract at best. I have said, and I have to say, I go back and forth of trying to figure out, and I think we as a community, and I have talked about this several times, have to decide how big are we going to get, right? And at what point do we have enough people? And there is always the impulse to say, well, I've got what I want. Let's close the gate, right? We hear this on a regular basis within the immigration discussions that are going on across the country right now. And you know, there's no necessarily right answer. This is one of those things that a lot of people are very, very sensitive about, and we're going to have to work through it and go through. You know, I look at water. My father's from Cincinnati, so I always say water. It's not really. I'll get that T right at some point. But water is if you trust the predictions around climate change, right? We're going to have a harder time around water, not an easier one. And how is that going to affect people, right? And right now, most of us, I'm sure not the people in this room, but most of the rest of the folks waste water relentlessly. We grow bluegrass. The hell, we're in a semi-arid climate. What are we growing bluegrass for, right? If you're not playing soccer on it, or you don't have kids running around on it, I mean, this is one of the things that just drives me nuts. But even when we tighten down, get rid of the bluegrass, even when we begin looking at really moving to a much more responsible, conservation-oriented approach to water. And, you know, for the record, I mean, it's funny, when I was out talking about gun safety in Grand Junction, and I'll digress here just for a second since I'm late already, that, you know, those protesters, after I gave my speech to Club 20, I invited the organizers to come in and talk about gun safety. Because a lot of them didn't have the facts, right? And the universal background check, you know, we get to about half, maybe even 60%, but reliably half the gun transactions in our present system. And yet all these people are saying, well, criminals aren't stupid. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to take if they're going to buy a gun, they're not going to go to a background check. So we asked our staff to figure out how many, we did all these background checks in 2012. Who did we catch? And I told this to the people in Grand Junction. We got 38 people who were trying to get a gun, who were either accused or convicted of homicide. 133 people either accused or convicted of sexual assault. 640 people accused or convicted of burglary. 1,300 people accused or convicted of felony assault. 420 people had a restraining order from a judge that they weren't allowed to see someone, and they were trying to buy a gun. And for these people that believe that criminals are smart, 236 individuals, when they came to pick up their gun, we arrested them because there was an outstanding warrant for violent crime. So, you know, I hold this out at the same thing. So I said to them, you know, when you limit the size of magazines, that's not necessarily a rural issue, but you know, 30 to 40% of the urban police officers that are killed in the line of duty are killed with a magazine clip that has more than 15 rounds in it, right? And I said, part of my deal was, when I became mayor of Denver, we instituted the most sweeping conservation programs we'd ever had. We cut, in the first 5 years, we cut water consumption per capita by almost 20% in Denver, the largest drop in an urban water district, a large city, probably in the history of the country, I think. And they had nothing to gain. Their water rates went up. Right? They had to keep reducing water because, you know, they used to have to replace all the pumps and the pipes. If the utility's selling less water, the price per gallon goes up. But we did that because of the relationship with the rural areas. and the rural areas have to recognize that they've got that partnership with us. And they, you know, they kind of got it. I mean, I'm not saying they embraced gun safety, but they kind of got it. And I think the question of how many people we have in Colorado is one of these discussions. It's got to have a lot to do with water, and a lot to do with, you know, what's interesting is on the 4th of July, I take my son, who's now 10, and we hike a 14er every year. And he, for the last 2 years, has beaten me up. If he was here, he'd be the first to tell you. But these are fairly close-in 14ers. We drive from Denver, and there have not been unbearable crowds on them. And I mean, the number of people using the backcountry has gone up somewhat, but not agonizingly, right? As someone who spent 2 summers, you know, in the wild country of South Central Montana, we've still got it pretty good here. But that doesn't mean that we will always have it good. And I think the discussion we have, and I think it's independent of fracking, but it's no less difficult, is how many people? We're a little over 5 million people now. 7 million? 6 million? Right? I mean, 7.5 million. And that's a challenge. I think the sooner we can go and begin discussing that, the more likely we'll get to a decision that everyone can embrace. Right now, especially coming out of this recession, the last time I saw numbers, 60% of the people in Colorado think we need more people here, right? 65%, right? I know that's not true in Boulder, right?
So I've been very torn here between a property value question and a water question, but I think I've got to ask the water question because there were several of them, and you've sort of been going
you can
that direction.
You know, if Patty was doing it, she'd weave them into one question. So go ahead, you can do that. I'll be concise.
Okay, so given that we live in a high desert, can we afford to spend our supply of water on fracking, which requires large amounts that are more or less permanently removed from the hydrologic cycle? And what do you do when fracking causes nearby property values to fall?
Okay, so the water issue, and this, again, climate change is, we have to rethink all of our assumptions around water. We're using less than 1/10% every year in fracking, right? And I mean, it's relative to what we use for agriculture and for our domestic and commercial uses, it is a drop in the bucket. And I actually worked out how many, if you assume 1.5 gallons is in a bucket and there's 20 drops in a cup, you know, it works out to 2 drops in a bucket, really. So it's a very small amount of water. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about it and figuring out how, and the larger oil companies are very close to getting to the point where they're going to recycle all this stuff, and they're going to get, you know, most of that fluid comes back up out of the hole when you reduce the pressure on it, because the rock formation has so much pressure on it. That's what pushes the gas out. That fluid comes back. They're getting very effective at separating the water from the gas from the oil, and not wasting any of it. And they've got to get better, and we're going to hold them to higher standards, but they are definitely getting better. There is also, when you burn natural gas, and this is something I didn't know until just a couple months ago, I'd forgotten my old chemistry, but when you burn hydrocarbons, the byproduct, you get energy, you get CO2, and you get water. And so the question is, that water goes up is in the form of vapor, how much of that gets back into the hydrologic cycle? Well, if you believe the hydrologic cycle is clouds and rain and ocean and evaporation, it all gets back into the hydrologic cycle. So it's a net positive of water. Now, what that is that's what Emerson would call foolish consistency, right? It's a hobgoblin of my little mind, because it's meaningless, right? The fact is we shouldn't be wasting water. And if we're creating some water, I think it's 10,000 gallons for every BCF of gas. It's a significant amount of water that goes into the hydrologic cycle, but that's not the point. The point is that we should be pressing the oil and gas industry relentlessly to use less water. And they hear that, and they're aware that they have lost, you know, the trust of people and the faith. And the larger, more responsible companies are working very hard to try and win that back. And, you know, I think we should hold them to high standards on that. In terms of property values, that balance. I mean, one of the laws we're looking at is when you buy a piece of property, if those mineral rights have been severed, if someone else owns those mineral rights, that should be in your title. When you buy that land, there should be something that tells you that someday somebody could come put a well by your land. Because that would change people's value, but at least it would be transparent and allow people to know what they were getting into. It is, again, as long as we have this, now historically, in terms of property values, and I was in Los Angeles yesterday working on a couple different issues, and one of the things we had to go meet with talking about education reform. I went to the home of a guy named Eli Broad, which probably most of you have never heard of, but he made a fortune in housing. KB Homes, I mean, very, very philanthropic. Probably next to the Gates Foundation, the largest donor. And he lives up in Beverly Hills, or off, not far from there. And in Beverly Hills, there are pump jacks pumping oil. It's by some of the most valuable real estate on earth. And I asked, I said, so what does this do to property value? And so it has an effect. Immediate, when it first happens, it's got a larger effect, and then it drops off. But it has a tail. It always having a piece of land. If 2 doors down, or 200 feet away, there's an old pump jack producing oil, that land's not going to be worth as much as someone who's a mile away. But it's relatively small over time. And again, if it's your land, it's your home, and where you've expected that you're going to retire to your peace and quiet, that's not much solace. But we have this split estate. I mean, and we got to figure out, whether we put it in title and make sure people know what they're getting into, how we do all this, we're going to have to deal with it.
Okay, I have surrendered my microphone, so I'm going to bellow here, but I would like to say, please. Oh, no, everyone's, for heaven's sake, I'm gone from feast or famine to feast. Okay, so I'm going to, first of all, we are within minutes of concluding the evening, but before we get to the conclusion, could we thank these excellent young people over here? The governor and his staff are lucky when I get my appointment to show up with the questions. I will have those folks with me, so you will have that good fortune. I think we should give you a couple of minutes here for a conclusion. I hope that in that conclusion you might say something about, by the way, is there water here? There's water for me, but you have water. Okay, good. If you could just take a part of your concluding remarks, whatever you want to touch on, and say what you would like to see happen in the form of public conversation and public discussion of this issue, places where you can see almost a kind of chiropractic adjustment that Colorado could go through. Is that the right analogy? I have no idea if that's the right analogy, but I don't want surgery. I don't want back surgery. No back surgery, but some kind of...
I like it.
No, sorry, there's a person who could perform the back surgery sitting right in the front row, but let's not do that. Okay, so some kind of just adjustment of the way we talk about this in Colorado that might make it more productive and just more worth having as a conversation. So, and anything you would like to say in conclusion?
Well, I think I think this is exactly how we get there, is to sit and have those discussions. I think what the Center for the American West does by taking on these contentious issues and not backing away, but going towards them and encouraging the free exchange of ideas. And I've been trying to figure out what kind of a website would allow us to post the different sides and have people put up what their facts are, and where they got those facts, and then we can get someone who can check it out, so that, because your student, when they asked, they said, so where do you get the facts that you trust? Boy, that is the question of the day in this new technologic Uber communications environment, is how do we get information that we trust? So I appreciate all of you taking, I know every one of you is as busy as we are, and that you're taking your time out, and I just encourage to bring it up around the water cooler, or when you're out having a glass of wine or beer with friends. The only way we're going to get the more people talk about something, and the more facets of an issue people learn, I think the higher the probability you are to change in some way what you perceive as your self-interest, right? And where progress happens is where people are able to recognize, I think, a broader self-interest, not a false one, but a legitimate broader self-interest, so that they can see how it affects others and that we're all part of a larger community. And the best, and I think really only way that happens long term is through people talking with each other and arguing it out. I grew up in a family that every night at the dinner table, and I was the youngest of 4, so I would watch my intensely argumentative older siblings. And my sister was just a year and a half older than myself, would about once a week burst into tears and run from the table because my older brother and older sister were so relentless in how intense the arguments became. Don't do that. Right? But I think that getting it out on the table and argue it, and hopefully we'll try and create a resource where people can come and get and have conflicting information and say where the information comes from, and again have layers in my mind's eye. And this is something that you guys I think will get to, is where you can go deeper and deeper into more technical information, right? So on the first website you get the more for a layman, and then you go deeper into where you're getting into the real science of the issue and let people go as deep as they want.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you all for your patience.
Yeah, that was nice.
That was amazing. Well, they're very respectful. That's,
Yeah, yeah. Well. That was good. That seemed good. It seemed like.
well done.
Could you stand in the midst of